About 200,000 years ago, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived side by side in Europe. But now, Neanderthals are gone for good. So, what happened to them? But this theory is unsupported by the fossil record, which shows that Neanderthals were actually more closely related to an earlier human species called Homo heidelbergensis than to us. In fact, the fossil record indicates that Neanderthals were so distinct from us that they could not have evolved directly from our lineage, since they lived in small groups of about 30 individuals, whereas our groups were larger, typically consisting of about 50 to 150 people. Well, maybe it's because their existence overlapped with one of ours for only a short time. Our ancestors evolved in Africa, where there was a lot of open grassland, so when they migrated to Europe, they felt right at home. Well, one possible explanation is that we brought something to Europe that Neanderthals lacked. The same team of researchers found that Neanderthals had 3 versions of the gene UBE. For a while, we only have 2. Since then, scientists have learned that UBE4A helps regulate the formation of synapses between neurons, which are essential for advanced cognitive abilities. Today, mutations in this gene lead to severe autism and intellectual disability. This raises the question, why did they lose in the end? Well, it's possible that their downfall was caused by something beyond their control. A paper published in 2017 proposed that the last ice age, which began 115,000 years ago, played a major role in the extinction of the Neanderthals. By 125,000 years ago, Europe was covered in ice sheets, and by 115,000 years ago, it was the coldest period of the last ice age. These conditions persisted for about 20,000 years before temperatures rose again. It just so happens that the Neanderthal record ends around this time too. Researchers think that during this extreme cold, the Neanderthals' usual food sources disappeared, forcing them to migrate south into warmer climates. Along the way, they encountered modern humans, and when they realized that we weren't willing to share our food, they resorted to stealing it, which led to violence and eventually war. The authors of this paper admit that their theory is speculative, but there's certainly something to it. After all, climate change is a well-known driver of extinctions, and it just so happens that both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were migrating into new territories during a period of drastic environmental change. So it seems that Neanderthals may have had the cognitive ability to communicate and coordinate with each other in complex ways. According to another theory, humans introduced a new predator into Neanderthal territory, namely our dogs. But dogs weren't always cute and cuddly companions. In their early years, they were ruthless killers that followed humans on hunts and stole their kills. In fact, experts think that dogs acted as guard dogs, keeping other predators away from human settlements. If this is true, they could have chased Neanderthals away from their food sources and killed them if they got too close. We won't know for sure until we find direct evidence of canines in Neanderthal territory. But the theory fits with what we know about dogs and the archaeological record. And it's possible that this ability enabled them to build large shelters, hunt large animals, and take other actions that required cooperation. As more discoveries are made, new theories will emerge and old ones will be revised. But one thing is certain. The story of human evolution is far more complicated than the simple narrative of good triumphing over evil. A few years ago, scientists recently discovered that Neanderthals also had the genetic basis for empathy. It turns out that they produced the exact same proteins from their version of the EMP gene as we do. Empathy doesn't seem to be the factor that set us apart from other human species. Researchers compared the DNA of Neanderthals and modern humans to identify genes that may have given us a competitive edge. One gene they found was the FOXP2 gene. Even our supposedly uniquely human behaviors have been observed in Neanderthals. For example, archaeologists used to think that only we practiced burial rituals, but recent findings indicate that Neanderthals buried their dead as well. Some researchers now believe that the deliberate disposal of the dead is a universal human trait that Neanderthals shared with us. Same goes for art. For a long time, experts believed that Neanderthals lacked creativity, but in 2015, they discovered engraved stones in Spain that date back 50,000 years, which makes them the oldest pieces of symbolic art ever found in Europe. They predate similar objects by at least 20,000 years. Of course, we can't say for sure what these engravings meant to Neanderthals, But the fact that they were made at all suggests that Neanderthals possessed the symbolic thinking skills that were once thought to be unique to humans, which plays a role in speech and language development. Modern humans have 2 versions of the gene, while Neanderthals have 3, but all 3 versions produce proteins that are basically identical. This suggests that Neanderthals lost a gene variant that allowed for more complex communication, which gave us an advantage when it came to planning hunts, coordinating group activities, and passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. In other words, it may have been our superior smarts that led to our success. Meanwhile, Neanderthals were perfectly suited to the cold, wooded environment of Europe. They had shorter, stronger limbs that were better for walking in the snow than ours, longer arms that allowed them to grip spears more easily, and brain cases that were larger than ours, suggesting greater cognitive ability. If anything, they had the upper hand when it came to surviving in Europe. Humans and Neanderthals shared European hunting grounds for about 5,000 years before the latter disappeared. But this was after tens of thousands of years of competition across the continent. Maybe the 2 species simply occupied different niches and competed for resources instead of going extinct. It's just hard to imagine that, given how similar our lifestyles were, we managed to outcompete such a capable species as the Neanderthals. Smaller groups can operate more efficiently, meaning Neanderthals could have hunted larger prey with relative ease. Also, Neanderthals were bigger and stronger than we are, so they had the physical capability of taking down large animals. Because unlike us, Neanderthals probably didn't develop religious beliefs that forbade cannibalism. Neanderthal bones show clear evidence of butchery. And some scientists think that the species regularly practiced endocannibalism, which means they ate the brains of their dead relatives. Cannibalism is often associated with desperate times, but archaeologists have found evidence that Neanderthals practiced it long before starvation became a problem. Plus, they seem to have seen it as a normal part of life. The practice may have helped them survive tough times, but it wasn't a last resort. Instead, it's likely that Neanderthals split off from Heidelbergenses around 600,000 years ago, before modern humans even showed up in Europe. Some researchers claim that we simply evolved into them. If anything, it was us who evolved from a population of Heidelbergensis, although some geneticists argue that interbreeding between the 2 groups must have occurred, because they lacked the cognitive ability to create and use complex tools like the spear thrower, which would have given them a huge hunting advantage. But recent studies suggest that Neanderthals actually used sophisticated technology of their own. For example, evidence suggests that they created fishhooks and atlatls, a kind of spear thrower. They also fashioned glue from pine resin and used it to attach stone tools to wooden handles, a technique that archaeologists previously thought was unique to Homo sapiens. After all, we carry about 4% of Neanderthal DNA in our genome today. But if there was any substantial interbreeding, why did the Neanderthals eventually disappear? To find the answer, researchers have proposed a variety of theories over the years. One popular idea is that Neanderthals went extinct. The truth is, Neanderthals weren't exactly slouches. In fact, they may have been better hunters than we were, so why don't we remember them as successful hunters? After all, another theory proposes that it was our adaptability that led to our success, not our intelligence or strength. So how did we beat them at their own game? But a study published in 2023 turned that idea on its head. So maybe it was our special ability to empathize that led to our victory over the Neanderthals. Except that's not true either. In fact, we share a lot more similarities with Neanderthals than differences. In many ways, Neanderthals were more like us than not. And if that wasn't bad enough, at the end of the day, it's impossible to say what led to the extinction of the Neanderthals. Now, check out why humans evolved to have opposable thumbs, or watch this video instead.